Welcome to Early Years Weekly, number 21.
Ow.
Ow. Did you bite your finger?
Yeah.
That's right, it's been a busy few weeks. Ruby's been visiting lots of customers in and around London, and me and Tony have just got back from Nursery World, where we filmed 10 interviews with the likes of Julian Grenier. He talked to us about his work on the development matters, and that is going to be coming out very shortly. We also spoke to Wendy Ratcliffe from Ofsted and a whole host of other brilliant early years experts, so make sure to keep an eye out for those coming up over the next few months. First up this week on the news front, Ruby has read an interesting report about the early years workforce.
Yes, so this report basically details early years workers being made to leave jobs that they love. So as we've highlighted many times before, the staffing crisis in the early years sector is arguably one of the biggest problems we face. Now, joint research by the National Centre for Social Research and the Education Policy Institute came up with this report. And I think the most shocking figure is that 67,000 early years workers have left the sector in the past year, which is obviously a huge amount. This is deemed to be down to various things, so low pay, lack of recognition, and also the emotional and physical demands of a job, like an early years practitioner. Dr. Sara Bonetti, Director of Early Years at the Education Policy Institute, commented saying, "This new research provides further evidence of a low-paid and undervalued early years workforce. If the government is serious about levelling up outcomes in education, it needs to look closely at how it supports those working with children at this crucial stage in their lives." So while I've been reading lots of academic reports, Matt's been listening to a podcast.
Yes. So last night, in fact, on Monday the 10th of February, the BBC Radio 4 show Analysis brought out a special feature on the early years. They talked to Liz Roberts from Nursery World, as well as Neil Leach from the Early Years Alliance, and a whole host of other names, including people from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and a leader on the research of the very influential preschool study in the US. Now, the whole argument was, we are spending £3.8 billion on the early years right now, and are we getting value for money? I think it is really worth listening to. It was around half an hour, and it's really interesting to see how someone from outside of the sector approaches this whole issue that we're seeing at the moment. Because when they see that 3.8 billion figure, they think that is a lot of money, and are we getting value for money? One of the big things that I got out of it was that they talked about how we need to balance these two interests that we have when we think about early years policy. So on the one hand, we want better child development, in particular for those from disadvantaged areas. But on the other hand, it's about getting parents back to work. And one of the things that they discussed was that those things are actually more competing than we think. For example, in Scandinavia, they have really successful policies that help with child development, but it doesn't necessarily get parents back into work. And in places like Quebec, they have really successful studies that have shown getting parents back into work, but it hasn't necessarily impacted children's outcomes. And in fact, in the UK, by trying to do both, we may end up doing neither. The thing they recommend: a more simple, subsidised approach to childcare, where parents just simply get extra subsidies for them to spend how they see best, whether they want to stay at home with their children or not. Really interesting programme, and I would definitely recommend.
So moving on, the news about parents needing to read more to their children. So a report by BookTrust found that 345,000 children in the UK receive less than 15 minutes of shared reading per week. And this is described as a literary poverty. On top of that, it stated that 1 in 7 parents or carers don't read their child a bedtime story.
And alongside this, the BookTrust are launching the Pyjama Rama Day, where children will encouraged to go into a reception or nursery or their setting wearing their pyjamas for the day to encourage that love for bedtime stories and donate £1 as they do it. It's interesting timing because we just filmed a fantastic interview with Andy McCormack, who's studying for his PhD in children's literature. And we talked about this importance of reading, how much value it brings, and some of our favourite children's picture books. So make sure to keep an eye out for that over the coming months.
And it'll be really interesting to hear what you do in your setting to kind of encourage parents and the importance around reading. So please leave comments below.
So next up, we've got the news that the UK's largest nursery provider, Busy Bees, have increased their expansion plans in the US. They're now up to 39 settings, having bought the 15th setting, EduKids, which means that they're offering 57,000 places for children across the world, from the UK to Australia to the US and Southeast Asia. What did you think about this story, Ruby?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see these UK-based nursery groups expanding abroad, as you say, into the US and other places, at the same time as foreign nursery groups expanding into the UK. So I suppose it's all just funneling towards that more group-based nursery kind of setup.
And I think, yeah, of course, you get this fantastic economy of scale from being part of a chain, which is a difficulty for some of the single settings. But when you start to see these chains going international, there's also something about that cross-cultural learning that you can have. I know I read a report recently that said somebody had visited Japan and they'd seen the skill with which 2-year-olds could be using chopsticks. And it just made them change their entire views around what younger children can do when it comes to fine motor control. And again, it's another thing that is to the advantage of these larger chains.
So our last story for today is a very interesting article from Julien Grenier, who Matt actually was able to interview at Nursery World, which is really exciting, so keep your eyes peeled for that. He wrote in the TES this week around the controversial sort of subject of cultural capital. So do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so he started off by talking a little bit about the disadvantaged and the discrepancy we have between children from disadvantaged backgrounds and not, because that's where this whole idea of cultural capital comes from. In particular, he raised a few concerns about the actual famous 30 million word gap, which you can read more about in the piece. But the particular argument he was trying to make is that we need to move away from what he called a deficit model of cultural capital, that it's all about what children don't have, and move towards this idea that we should see cultural capital as what every child brings to the setting, and how we as a setting and providers can make sure that we give every child the opportunity to explore those cultural experiences in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think it was a really thoughtful piece, so check it out. And thank you very much for watching. As ever, please remember to subscribe and like if you enjoyed the content this week, and we'll see you next time.